Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is Jew hatred over the years. Over the years, things have changed so dramatically, and yet things are still the same. The Nazis marched in Chicago in 1979, and in 2024, supporters of those who murdered Jews marched outside the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. Schwer zu sein a Yid. My grandmother used to tell me that all the time. In Yiddish it means, it is difficult to be a Jew. As a child, she told it to me so often, I thought it was actually English. From my grandmother's perspective, it was a truism. It was undeniable as gravity. She did not understand it, but she knew that it was there. It was everywhere. Shalom Aleichem wrote a play with the same title. A play premiered on the Lower East Side of Manhattan on October 1st, 1920, at the Yiddish Art Theater on 2nd Avenue. The play was a comedy about the difficulties of the Jewish-Gentile relations. It took place in Russia. The play was funny, but the reality is much more challenging. In my grandmother's eyes, the expression was not humorous. My grandmother's expression was meant to be a warning to me and to everyone. She understood Jew hatred. She wanted me to be on the lookout for people who hate Jews simply because we are Jewish. During this episode of my childhood, when my grandmother was giving me the lessons on this life, the Nazis were attempting to and eventually succeeded in marching in the village of Skokie, Illinois. Actually, they eventually marched in the suburb in Chicago itself. Skokie was a small, predominantly Jewish village with a lot of survivors. And they did not want Nazis on their streets. The village said no to them. The case went through the courts and the Nazis eventually won and marched. At the same time, however, there was also a gargantuan counter-protest against them. These were not neo-Nazis or skinheads of today. These were actually Nazis, paying members of the Nazi Party in the United States, who were allowed to march down the streets. They had been constitutionally protected. They had the right of freedom of speech and freedom of assembly, even in Chicago, in Skokie, where many Holocaust survivors were living. Skokie was a milestone, not just in law, but for the Jewish community. As a child, I remember the debates around the Shabbat table for and against the Nazis' right to freedom of speech. The court cases took months in 1977, 1978 to decide. Fast forward to Chicago during the Democratic National Convention. I watched anti-Jewish, anti-Israel protests and marches outside the convention center. I watched the vitriol, the hatred of Israel and of America. I watched them burn flags. Burning a U.S. flag is a protected right. The courts have ruled that. And although there are federal laws protecting and caring for the U.S. flag, there are suggestions, and burning the flag is a form of protected expression and speech. I was shocked to discover that lovers of Israel were denied permission to rally and to march during the DNC in Chicago. No explanation was given. The group, the Chicago Jewish Alliance, applied 2 more times and got no answer to their permits and requests to rally and march. Witnessing the injustice, a private person stepped in and donated space for the lovers of Israel to gather. This was no problem because on private property, municipal permission is not required. The irony cannot be lost. The double standard is infuriating. The Nazis were able to march. The haters of Israel were able to march. But lovers of Israel were denied. Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson has said that he supports the anti-Israel protesters. Not their right to speak, of course, that goes without saying, but rather he supports their hateful cause. The First Amendment guarantees that people with repulsive points of view, views that I don't agree with, let's say for instance, and opinions that are abhorrent, but they are protected. They're still protected rights. Chicago needs to answer as to why the pro-Israel rally was denied. We have to push them hard and get real answers. One inadequate answer so far has been that the permit request was not submitted on time, but according to the Chicago Jewish Alliance, The permit request was submitted in the beginning of June, and Chicago law only requires 2 weeks for a permit. This is clearly not the reason, obviously. Another answer offered was that the police could not keep both groups safe, yet there was enough space in downtown Chicago for both groups to be far enough apart, and there was enough police to protect both groups. The only explanation that I could come to as of now is that the officials in the city who made the decisions were blatantly anti-Israel and support the pro-Hamas rallies. Unfortunately, in the 46 years since Skokie, my grandmother's understanding of Jew hatred is still valid. Although there was a period when I was hoping that it had changed, and I was almost convinced it had, but it has not. There are some people in power in both political parties who simply do not like Jews and do not like Israel. These haters of Israel have been given platforms and megaphones. They are heard and they are very loud. While it was once impolite and inappropriate to articulate these hateful views of Jews, today it is acceptable. There is another side. Do not be discouraged. Do not be disheartened. Jews and Israel, and lovers of Israel, and friends of Israel, and friends of Jews, those friends have begun to organize, and they are forcing university administrations and politicians to protect Jewish students and Jewish citizens. There is a light at the end of the tunnel, and is getting closer day by day. Coming up next, points of view. First up is a column from Ynet that was written by Ron Ben-Ishai and was published on August 31st, 2024. If you are not familiar with Ron Ben-Ishai, then you should make yourself familiar. He is so insightful on military and Arab affairs. He also has great insight into U.S.-Israel relations. This piece is entitled, "Is the Smouldering Intifada Spreading to Hebron?" Subtitled Analysis, Terror Battalion Phenomenon Yet to Spread South of Jerusalem, but External Backing, Arms Smuggling, and West Bank's Worsening Economic Crisis could compel IDF to increase forces in area. Rapid intelligence efforts may help contain threat. That's the subtitle. Ynet has taken and given the entire substance of a piece in their headline and subheadline. Yet the details are important. One of the great things of Ron Ben-Ishai, and one of the things he does so well, is he also gives solutions to problems in his column. This is how Ron Ben-Ishai begins. The phenomenon of terror battalions operating in the northern West Bank, particularly in recent months in the areas like Jenin and Tulkarem, have not yet spread to the regions south of Jerusalem, including Hebron and the southern Hebron Hills. Several factors contribute to this containment, primarily pre-existing presence of Hamas and Islamic Jihad, and even Fatah extremists in Jenin and Tulkarem, long before the escalation on October 7th, when Hamas called for assistance from Gaza as the IDF intensified operations there. Ben-Ishai explains how the terror is emerging, and then explains how it should be tamped down and even stopped. He writes, "The IDF must try to prevent a flare-up in the Hebron area to avoid redeploying additional forces, resources it does not have, to the West Bank. Such a shift would undermine the IDF's ability to conduct ground operations in Gaza and, if necessary, in Lebanon. The national security establishment must now increase vigilance and security measures in communities south of Jerusalem, intensify border patrols on main routes, and urgently secure the separation barrier, which is particularly vulnerable in the southern Hebron Hills. The burden of preventing a wave of terrorism south of Jerusalem and in the Hebron area falls primarily on the Shin Bet and military intelligence. Their success in swiftly arresting inciters and preventing the smuggling of weapons from northern Samaria to areas south of Jerusalem is crucial for maintaining control." Now, Ron Ben-Ishai concludes by writing that, and I'm quoting here, "It is expected that Iran, along with Hamas operatives abroad in Turkey, Lebanon, and the West Bank Command, remnants in Gaza, will now attempt to shift the focus of the smoldering intifada to the area south of Jerusalem. Should they succeed, the IDF may find itself fighting on 2 active fronts and possibly a third. Given the ongoing low enlistment among ultra-Orthodox communities, this could present a significant challenge. Moreover, if the terror campaign spread south of Jerusalem, it could spill over into Israel proper beyond the Green Line. Therefore, the fight must now focus on all aspects of fueling terrorism, ranging from arresting and thwarting key operatives to eliminating external handlers, with a particular emphasis on preventing the smuggling of weapons and funds into Hebron, Bethlehem, and the southern Hebron Hills. This is an excellent piece by Ram Ben Ishai. Almost everything he writes is insightful. Thank you, Ram Ben Ishai. Next up is a column by Judah Waxelbaum, and it was published in the Jerusalem Post on September 1st, 2024. It's entitled Drawing Relevant Lessons from Nixon's 1973 Middle East Diplomacy. Opinion, subtitled, As the 50th anniversary of Nixon's Middle East tour approaches, the strategic lessons from his 1973 diplomacy reveal crucial insights for today's U.S.-Israel relations and regional security. This is a historical column. Historical columns are important not because of insight, but to let us know that we are not living in a vacuum. They offer perspective and explain how the past very much informs what is happening now in the Middle East. This is how Waxelbaum begins. It has been nearly 50 years since President Richard Nixon launched his historic diplomacy campaign across the Middle East. Nowadays, it's commonplace for presidents to do regional tours and meet with leaders. But at the time, Nixon was the first sitting president to make such overtures to the Middle East. This tour was not without a dramatic backdrop. The Yom Kippur War had recently ended, and tensions were high. By examining this moment, we can implement critical lessons in the conflicts faced by the United States and Israel. Waxelbaum now correctly explains the dilemma that Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir had. It was not an easy situation. He writes, in 1973, it was not a given that the U.S. would aid Israel against the coalition led by Egypt and Syria. Key advisors to Nixon were split on how to react to Prime Minister Golda Meir's messages. The president's men feared that assistance to Israel would result in the throttling of oil markets by the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, and argued for restraint until Israel's borders, not territory won in 1967, such as the Sinai, were threatened. Waxelbaum writes that Nixon understood that in the Middle East and elsewhere, the only path to peace is when the others are convinced that they cannot win against the United States and its friends. Waxelbaum continues, Tehran's involvement with the proxy groups such as Hamas and Hezbollah and puppet governments in Iraq is a much more direct approach than the USSR's shipment of arms to Egypt and Syria. By projecting force and dismantling Hamas and Hezbollah, both Israel and the US safety are bolstered, making clear to those who chant death to America and Israel that their threats are nothing more than empty words, is how we maintain a sphere of strategic interest. Inroads with other nations in the region is an objective of significant importance, but we must revert to the strategy that President Nixon understood. Peace will come when enemies grasp that they cannot defeat us. Standing with allies in face of these crises will produce lockstep partnerships and ensure the standing of both states. In conclusion, Waxelbaum writes, it's easy to let others fight their battles, but conflict does not exist in the vacuum. Being neutral allows belligerent parties to choose when you are next. I recommend world leaders who back away from this moment to travel to Yorba Linda, California, home of the Richard Nixon Presidential Library Museum, to learn how Nixon rose to the occasion in 1973 and beyond. This is an excellent column. I normally stay away from historical columns, because their perspective is often limited. This one was very different. Coming up, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. I want to show you 7 cartoons today, only cartoons today, and some of them are biting and some of them are extremely anti-Israel. This first cartoon is from far away India. We see Hamas and Israel playing tennis with a bomb. They're both very badly wounded. Someone is going to get blown up. That's the implication of the cartoon. Next up is a cartoon of a hatchet cutting through an Israeli machine gun, meaning it's very clear that the Arabs are going to destroy Israel. It's an Israeli machine gun. Third up is a map of Israel made of chains. The Golan Heights, Gaza, and the West Bank are made of fists, and fists represent resistance. Resistance to Israel. They're fighting Israel. Fourth up is a cartoon of Bibi Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel. He is on what is entitled in the title of the cartoon, a murderous tank, and he is perched on top of the globe. This next cartoon is entitled Time Has Run Out. The peace dove is in an egg timer, and the only things in the top section of the hourglass are rockets, rifles, bullets, bayonets, and no time is left. This next cartoon depicts the Israeli Air Force as murdering innocents. It's dark and deeply troubling. And finally, this last cartoon is called The Dove with Prunes. The bird is being cooked in a pot filled with bullets, and the dish gets 1 Michelin star. It's a Star of David on an Israeli flag. Very, very biting. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. Unknown persons sprayed the words BB Killer on the vehicle belonging to the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's motorcade. This is a vehicle that's part of providing security to the traffic lanes. The Shin Bet is investigating how the vandals got to the car without interference. This is certainly a serious security breach. Imagine if they could get there to plant or paint, they could certainly get there to plant a bomb. This is a real big problem. The organizers of the ceasefire protests claim that 700,000 demonstrators across Israel came to protest. That's a lot of people to a rally. That the number of participants in the main demonstration on Kaplan Street in Tel Aviv was 550,000. If that number is correct, even close to correct, that number is mind-boggling. Despite the news coming out of Washington, Saudi news outlet Al-Hadat cited Palestinian sources as saying, and I'm quoting here from the sources being cited in the Saudi paper, a deal in Gaza Strip, according to the U.S. proposal, won't take place soon. Gaps in the agreements are large despite the optimism seen in Washington, the report added. The spokesperson for Hamas's armed Al-Qassam brigades, Abu Ubaida, said that the Palestinian group has issued new instructions to guards handling hostages if Israeli forces approach detention sites, reiterating blame on Israel for the deaths of the hostages. They must always blame Israel for the deaths of the hostages. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan discussed Gaza as well as regional and global developments in a phone conversation with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Erdogan's office said all of this in a post on X. They stated that Israeli attacks and human rights violations must be stopped. A lasting ceasefire must be established. President Erdogan underscored the importance of joint action by Islamic countries. With regard to this issue, the announcement said on X. Tugs, that's tugboats, are expected to begin towing a damaged Greek oil tanker that has been drifting for days now after being hit and booby-trapped by Houthi terrorists. Yemen's Houthi Foreign Minister Jamar Amer said, as the vessel remains adrift and on fire in the Red Sea, the Greek-registered Tsunayan poses an environmental hazard after it was damaged on August 21st by Houthi forces. The tanker, which the Houthis and maritime sources have said has been rigged with explosives, is laden with 1 million barrels of crude oil. Quote, tugboats are expected to arrive to begin towing the Sanyunian ship, Amr said in the statement on Facebook. Houthis said that they would allow salvage crews to tow the ship, which has been on fire since August 23rd. To safety amid fears of potential slip of 150,000 tons of crude oil into the Red Sea. And now on to the Paralympics. Israel does very well in the Paralympics, and they are very proud. In the first few days of the Paralympics, Israel garnered 6 medals. 6. Swimmer Ami Dadon won a silver medal in the Paralympics. Dadon finished second in the 150-meter individual medley, earning his second medal. He earlier in the week earned a gold for the 100-meter freestyle. Israeli rowers Shachar Milfeder and Saleh Sachin won bronze medals in the mixed double sculls in their Olympic debut at the 2024 Paris Paralympics. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. There was much anger and frustration in Israel concerning the massacre of October 7th and the hostages and the ceasefire. People and emotions are still very raw and very high. In this 4-minute clip, which takes place in Kibbutz Nir Oz, we see Reuma Kedem, an aunt who lives in the area. Reuma goes to the kibbutz of her sister, her niece, great-nieces, and great-nephews. She's picking up remains of dolls, and she happens to see Defense Minister Yoav Gans. She can barely speak at the beginning. She is just saying the word telephone, telephone, telephone. The meaning is that there was a hint of intel about this, and the leadership should have made the call to the kibbutzim and put them on alert. There was a hint of intel. As she begins to get her words, as she gets them out, she's crying. She tells Gans that there is a God, and the leaders responsible for not calling, for not making the telephone call, will be punished. He does not respond. He just stands and listens respectfully.
טלפון אחד, צאו מפה. אין לי ליב. איפה אתה? באלעד. איפה? טלפון אחד. טלפון אחד, ערב קודם. תמר הייתה יוצאת. טלפון. למשל, מישהו, לאחות החמודה שניצלה עם הבעל שלה שנפצע, לילדים, טלפון, לחמוד הזה, חבר'ה, תתכוננו, משהו קורה. אני עכשיו לבוא אליי, שאני שורפת איתם, אוספת את הבובות של הילדים שלי. תמר, ג'ון, 3 הנכדים, ארבל, שחר, עומר, תאומות, לא, רק אור ואהבה, ואימא של ג'ון, סבתא קרו, ממש, כל החברים. אנחנו, טלפון אחד, טלפון למישהו, מה ביקשנו? הלב נקרא, יש אלוהים בשמיים באמת, אבל מי צריך לשלם ובגדול. זה לא גזירה, זה אנשים שלא מילאו את תפקידם. טלפון אחד, וידע לכם, טלפון. אנחנו גרים בין השלושה. מבינים מיד שזה אירוע חריג. אנחנו תחת התקפה. אין בלונים, אנחנו תושבי המקום. מזהים, איפה הייתם? באמת נפשתם באילת. איפה? שבוע קודם, ככה הפקרתם אותנו. אין אלוהים בשמיים. עד מתי? עד מתי נשתוק? עד מתי? עד מתי? מה יש לי להפסיד? מה? אז בתים יותר מפוארים? אז נכסים יותר גדולים? אז כיסא יותר רחב? אז שכר? מי יחזיר? אדם שלם בוא איתי לבית הקברות. בואו תראו מה זה. קבר אחים? שואה. כולם קבורים. מה זה המציאות הזו? אתה מסתכל עליי, תחשוב שזה הנכדים שלך, הנינים שלך, עוד 10 שנים. מה אתה מסתכל עליי בפליאה כזו? הוריי...
אני שומע אותך.
הוריי הגיעו, אמא שלי ב-90 מתה מצער. אמרה, איך יכול להיות? אבא שלי קיבל פרס ביטחון ישראל, הציל עשרות פעמים. סבא יהודה, סבא של תמר. אנחנו פה. מה אתם עושים? מה אתם עושים? ממשלה מזופתת, מה אתם עושים? מה? אני רק... אני מבין, מה אני אגיד? אין, בידום הארון, יש אלוהים בשמיים. ביידיש, אתם יודעים, אומרים, כל כלב יבוא היום שלו. לא יכול להיות. לא יכול להיות. אני לא יודעת איך אתה הגעת, אנחנו הגענו.
אני הגעתי במקרה.
גם אנחנו במקרה, אבל בשמיים. אתם תשלמו, כל בעלי התפקידים ישלמו על זה. לא תשלמו את זה, ישלמו על זה כל בעלי, כל שר. הגיע היום שלו. בעזרת השם, באמת.
Her anguish is so powerful. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.